Okay. So here we are again, trying to restart the live stream. Put a note here. I blame Windows 11 because I upgraded and now I'm having problems. But here we are. Hopefully we don't have any more problems. Yeah. I took a screenshot of the questions that we had, so I can continue from where I left off. Hopefully everything continues to run nicely. Yes, we're back. So continuing from where we were before, I was talking about the past continuous and past perfect continuous, and I basically explained that. Yes, David, I see your question here. I took a screenshot of the previous question, so I still have them. So I'd, she'd, you'd is the D a stop D? It can be, yes. By default in isolation, I'd, she'd, you'd. Always possible to enunciate them with a weak D. Or if I say, I don't know, she'd imagine something else. She'd imagine. Now it's a flap D because it's connecting to that vowel. So again, there's more than one answer. It depends. It's very dynamic. But in isolation by default, if it doesn't connect to anything, yes, you can stop it. That's the standard thing to do. Should I say, so Daniela, should I say breath with the e or e sound? It's not e. The noun is breath. B-R-E-A-T-H. That's the e vowel, third vowel sound on the vowel chart. The verb is breathe, which uses a voiced th, not a voiceless th, like breath. It's breathe, spelled with a silent e at the end, and that uses the e vowel, the first vowel sound. Alejandro, I don't know if Alejandro is back into our current live stream, but hello. Sergio, when you pronounce the bunched R, is your tongue blade touching the alveolar ridge? When you're pronouncing any vowel, you are not touching the top of your mouth. The only thing that touches with a vowel sound, the sides of your tongue can touch the sides of your teeth, depending on the exact sound. That's fine. With the exception of the R, you can anchor the tip of your tongue on the bottom of your teeth. Not required, but it's possible. But no vowel will touch the top teeth. No vowel will touch the top of the mouth, including the R. If you're touching, it's not a vowel. Zuckerberg said, we still have a ways to go with Nazaire, but we're making good progress. What does ways mean in the sentence? Please provide some sentences using ways. Okay. So this is a good case where you can't just isolate a word, because if you just talk about the word way or ways in the plural, that's going to have a completely different meaning than this phrase. It's a collocation or chunk, right? So it works together to create a meaning. And I'm still working off of the previous screenshot. This is the last one. So let me see. Hold on. So I see A is here. Don't worry. I'm going to get to you. Delio. Yes. Hello, Delio. I'm all right. Hope you're good as well. So I'm going to answer this one because this was part of the previous stream before I had to restart. And then I'll get to A's question. I was referring to the R consonant. R consonant and R vowel are exactly the same. They're exactly the same. An R is an R. Okay. R is an R. The only technical difference between the consonant and the vowel is that the vowel is relatively very slightly longer, and it has nothing to do with the actual length of the sound. It's just compared to the consonant, it's a little bit longer. So if I say run, it's not run. It's just run. You just hit a quick R. And if I say earth, right, it's not earth. It's earth. So it's just relatively slightly longer. You'll see different IPA symbols for the R's. It's a big, complicated mess. Technically, some dialects, maybe they'll do something slightly different, but you don't have to. It's unnecessarily complicated. I pronounce them exactly the same. There's no problem pronouncing them the same. Okay, anyway, so with ways, you can't just look at way or ways as an isolated word here. When we say a long way off, long way or long ways, it's interchangeable. It doesn't matter if it's plural or not. A long ways off or a long way off. This collectively as a phrase means that, right, think about it. We're talking about a distance, not a literal distance in this case. It could be a literal distance. So if I say, let's say we're driving, right, and we're in San Diego, California, and we're going to drive to New York. Okay, New York is on the opposite side of the country. So we start driving, and I say, well, we're a long way off from New York, meaning we are a long distance from New York. That's all it means. You can apply that figuratively, like Zuckerberg did. And in that sense, it just means that, this is where we are in the state of whatever project or whatever we're trying to build or do, and the goal is here. So we still have a lot of work to do in order to reach this point over here. So we're just applying that distance idea abstractly, and that's all it means. It just means there's a lot of work left to do. Okay. Okay, A. Why in your transcription the ninth vowel, as in go, isn't a diphthong? Very good question. O does not have to be a diphthong. It is taught by, as far as I know, every American English teacher as a diphthong. It doesn't have to be a diphthong. There's something called the California O, which is not a diphthong. And part of the English Hacks way is making things easier and simpler for you, less complicated, right? So I don't know if you've watched the main lesson I have for O, I explain all this. But the hack is the O and the U are mostly in the lips. Okay, the exact tongue position and what you're doing with your tongue can be very important, yes. But the biggest single determining factor of if your O or U sounds good is going to be mostly in the lips. Okay, because most languages, when they do an O or an U, they just stick the lips out. O, U, right? And that's what the sound is. English doesn't do that. English more brings the lips around. And if we're not, super clearly enunciating, we're not emphasizing, then we won't bring it all the way up and around. But there's still this sort of basic motion of, instead of just sticking out, there's this little sort of dynamic rounding of the lips. So if I fully enunciate, go, you see the lips, go. They don't just say go, okay? If I'm speaking more normally, go. See, there's this still sort of motion going like this instead of sticking straight out. Now, if you use your native language O sound, which, again, different languages are different. I don't know all languages, but in my experience, most languages just make O like that, O. If you do that, but you add this sort of lip rounding, which involves some muscles that you probably haven't developed yet, then you have to practice that. But if you can get the lips going and don't really worry, like keep everything else the same as your native language with your mouth, there's a very good chance that your O is going to sound fantastic. You might need to do a little bit of tweaking or small changes with the exact position and tenseness of your tongue to get it perfect if you want to, but what's going to give you 80% of the result is the lip motion. So O does not have to be a diphthong. When I say O, I notice that sometimes the diphthong one comes out, sometimes the non-diphthong one comes out. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a diphthong. Okay. The glasses are still a few years out. What does a few years out mean? What does out mean in the sentence? Well, think about it. So he's talking about, I guess, some glasses. I assume it's for like mixed reality or virtual reality or something. So it's a product, and they're still a few years out. So we're talking about, okay, what is the status? What is the current state of this project? These glasses that we're making. So that's the context. Okay, and they're still a few years out. So we know that the glasses aren't made yet. And he, somebody asks him, when will the glasses be released? When are they going to be, made? Well, if they're a few years out points away from the present moment. Okay, meaning we plan that this won't be done until a few more years. Like within the next few years, we will finish them, but that's when we expect to have them done. So not now, right? So we're using out to refer to time, meaning away from the present moment. It's really an interesting use of out. It fits the logic perfectly. There's no problem with it, but we're actually applying a concept of physical space to time. And sometimes we can do that in an abstract way, because like literally if I say, I could say let's say the beach, right? Where do I live? I live about 11 or so blocks from the beach because I'm in a little beach town. Okay, great. Now I could say the beach is 11 blocks out, right? Meaning away from where I am. And then you could just apply that to time, right? So maybe I'm writing a book, right? And you say, hey, when's the book going to be published? And I say, it's about 3 months out. Meaning I plan to have it finished in about 3 months. So we're just labeling that endpoint in terms of time using the idea of distance. Okay, anyway, I know that might be kind of confusing, but it should make sense. YJ, welcome. Hello, the short ooh as last live chat. I was referring to high schwa upside down V. Yeah, because you never got back to me on that. Okay, the high schwa is not the upside down V. I think we're kind of jumbled up here. Could you please explain again how to make the sound? I hear ultra and cut sounds different. That's because ultra and cut do sound different. Okay, this seems like a really big mess here. So let me re-straighten this out. Okay, as I said, number one, short ooh is a stupid, confusing term that I don't use. I don't recommend you use it. Okay, so there's the schwa, which is okay, and that's the upside down E, okay, strictly speaking. Now, in American English, there's the upside down V, which is essentially the end of the full range of what we call the schwa. It's actually just the full range of one sound, these 2 points, the and it's more open. Okay. I have lessons on that. You can go watch that. That's the schwa. Okay, so the upside down E and the upside down V are both the schwa. Not technically, strictly speaking, but this is the English hex way. We don't care about that. For the high schwa is like book. Okay, and I call it the high schwa as I explain in the high schwa lesson, because it's not actually a schwa, but if you take where the schwa is, the and you sort of shift it up and back a little bit, then it's almost like you're trying to do a schwa sound from like a slightly farther back, higher position. And it's not actually a schwa. It's a different sound, but that's the way I visualize it, and that's the way that I teach it. And if you don't want to think of it as a high schwa because that's confusing to you, don't. Just think of it as in book. Okay. Or I guess maybe short ooh if you like that. But again, I don't recommend short and long because that's not accurate. Now, in addition to that, so ultra and cut. Now, cut uses the schwa. Okay, the upside down V, what I call the not true schwa, but it's part of the to sound range. Okay. So it's cut. If I say that quickly, it becomes a true schwa, the upside down E. Cut it. Okay. So ultra would be an L-colored schwa, which would start with again, upside down V, not the true schwa. It starts with but it's immediately colored into L. Ultra. However, the way that I speak and the way that I teach, there is no L-colored schwa. Okay, you never have to do an L-colored schwa. It doesn't have to exist. You can just do a half L vowel sound, the dark L, ultra. Okay, so even if you decide to use the L-colored schwa, which you can if you like the sound, if you want, it's not going to make you sound any more neutral or anything like that. Then the difference between the vowel sound in ultra and the vowel sound in cut is that the first one is L-colored, and that's going to make it sound a little different, but it does start in the same position. But those, whether it's ultra, okay, with just the half L, and then cut, those are regular schwas, or just the half L if you don't do the L-colored schwa. What you're asking about, it seems, is which is a completely different sound, like in book. Okay. So let's see if I can find what's a minimal pair here. Okay, so for example, buck would be the upside down V, right? The not true schwa, as I call it. Buck. The sound you seem to be asking about is this, book. Really different sound. Okay, so buck uses the sound like in cut or in ultra if you use the L-colored sound, version of that sound instead of the half L. And then the sound in book is a completely different sound. So that should sort all of that out, hopefully. Explain how to make the sound. So now, if you can, because I'm 99% sure that you're asking about, you want me to explain again how to make the sound like in book? Or are you asking, just to make sure, are you asking about how to make the upside down V, okay, which is not the high schwa? And let me know if you have any questions about everything I just explained. I meant the upside down V sound. Okay. Okay, good. So good. So then that, it's complicated. The sound itself is not complicated, but how to explain it can be complicated because, so there's the way I explained it in the basic lesson, which I assume you already watched. But when I'm working with students, usually I have to explain this sound in at least 2 or 3 different ways and try to approach it in 2 or 3 different angles of like, okay, let's try this with the tongue, or let's think about it this way or whatever, before they kind of start to get it. Not like logically, but just like in terms of like getting their tongue to do what they want it to do. And most teachers, right, when they talk about the actual schwa, they say it's just very neutral and very relaxed, which for English speakers is true. That's completely true. It's sort of this neutral position for us. But your native language neutral position might be maybe that's sort of your neutral position. And that's not a schwa. That's not the upside down V. It's not any of that. And so I don't think that's a very useful way to teach it. And hello, Gabriel, yes. A little late, that's okay. The biggest piece of advice that I can give you here, which this applies to all sounds, but especially to this one, you need to be playing with your tongue just try to notice, even in your native language, how your tongue is moving, because you're not conscious of that. You don't feel your tongue. But the more that you can build up a feeling for your tongue, the more that you can make little changes, especially if you can hear the difference between sounds, but you can't quite produce them. That means you don't have enough tongue sensitivity and tongue control, and you need that to make little changes to make the sound better. If you have trouble hearing if the sound is correct or not, which is very common and normal, you need to get some sort of feedback. Whether that's just from a native speaker, doesn't have to be a teacher, and you can find people on iTalki. But that said, that's going to be the biggest thing. And then, of course, using the bell chart to kind of figure out, okay, it's more or less around here. Make sure that the back of your tongue is not too high or too tense, because if you do that, it's going to sound something like either or something like which kind of sounds like, okay, is that an or is that an ah? So it sort of sounds like it's in the middle. A very, very common problem is to sort of get stuck in the middle between the upside down V, and ah, the fifth vowel sound, like in saw. And so if you notice that you have that problem, you say, okay, so there's something wrong with my tongue where I'm maybe a little too far back towards ah, and so you kind of need to bring it forward a bit. And then if you start noticing you're sounding like okay, you're letting the sound sort of roll down and forward a bit. And it's not necessarily where your tongue is, it's where the tension in the tongue is, and also like the bit of the angle, the shape of the tongue. So for the whether that's a true upside down E schwa or the upside down V, which again is the full range of one sound, regardless, one of the ways that I like to teach is to make a bowl shape, because that sometimes fixes the problem. Because if you tend to say if you lift this up a bit, then it can kind of correct that tenseness and shift it back a little bit, and you say Do you have to lift the front of your tongue to make the sound? No, it's not required, but it can help you kind of figure out what to do. Focus on feeling the tenseness. Okay, where do you feel the tension on your tongue? Okay, that's very, very important. Look at the vowel chart. Look at where the dot is for and try to feel tension around there. It's the middle of the tongue. Okay, the height, how open your mouth is, isn't a very important detail. It can be useful if you're fully enunciating. We tend to go more into like a full open position, but it's not the most important thing. It's where the tension on the tongue is, and a bit about the tongue shape. So the front of the tongue really doesn't matter for it's just a little trick that can help you kind of shift it back and get into the right position. Other than that, one thing that can affect this, I was talking last time about mouth placement rather than voice placement. If your language has a more forward mouth placement, where you have a little extra tension in the back of your tongue and you kind of speak, it's really abstract and weird. It's like you're speaking more from the front of your mouth. That doesn't mean there's no sounds back here. I tried to demonstrate that last time, and if it's confusing, don't worry too much about it. But you might want to try to sort of shift back and relax the default tongue position, and then try to get the sound in there instead of having this forward. Because if I try to sort of shift my mouth placement forward and I try to say it's still going to sound pretty much like the same sound, but so when I say that's normal American English mouth placement. It's like it's not farther forward, it's kind of more relaxed. Where if I try to push my sounds forward, there's this extra sort of tension. The back of the tongue is maybe a little higher, a little more tense. And so even though I'm still hitting the right sound, I'm still putting the tension in the right place. This default mouth position can cause a little bit of interference. It's not the biggest point, but especially if you're having difficulty finding the exact sound and it just doesn't sound quite right, trying to affect the default placement of your tongue can have an impact. So, I mean, I don't really know what else to say about that. So if you have any more specific questions, like should I do this, should I do that, whatever, blah, 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 then yeah. Um, trying to feel the sides. Yeah, not really anything special there. Okay. Danielle, I heard the words here and here pronounced the same, but the final R sounds different to me. Is there a difference or not? No, there's no difference. They're pronounced exactly the same. They're homophones, meaning they're two words that sound exactly the same. Disorder, smarter, or disorder, starting smarter. Dropping the R here is a British thing. That song from Adele, there's a fire starting in my heart without the R in starting. An American singer American singer sings that song, and he did the same. Maybe it's weak and I'm not noticing, or isn't there at all? Okay, so two things. Number one, American English, which there are certain accents like the Boston accent or whatever where they don't follow this, but and some Southern accents don't follow this, but standard American English is what we call fully rhotic. Fully rhotic, okay? Which means that if there's any R, whether it's the R consonant, the vowel, or any of the R colored vowels like R or, anytime you see an R, it will be pronounced as an R of some kind, okay? If you don't do that, it's not going to sound like American English. It's going to sound probably British. So disorder, starting, smarter, okay? That's British. In British English, or at least in received pronunciation, they only pronounce the consonant, and the vowels are not actually R sounds. Now, in singing is a completely, well, not completely, but singing is a different thing. Weird things happen in singing. And even if there's an American singer, sometimes American singers will do this sort of thing in their singing. Especially if, say, the original version was British, they might imitate that and keep that. Like when I'm singing Ed Sheeran's song, right, singing along, like say the song Perfect, right? He says, "You look perfect tonight," or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but I'll not always, but I tend to naturally just go with the way that he says it. Now, if I were singing the song myself, maybe I would try to, use my accent and just speak normally, or maybe not. But singing again is strange. There are some singers who they just don't fully pronounce their R vowels when they're singing. Maybe it's lighter, or maybe it's actually more of this sort of British type sound, and that's just how they sing. Okay. But singing is not speech. Singing is not speech. Are these words pronounced the same? Curious versus cure, us, upward versus upward. Okay, so curious and cure us, no. Because curious is curious. Curious is 3 syllables. Curious. Cure us is just 2. Cure us. So you're missing that middle sound. Upward and upward, yes, those are pronounced exactly the same. Let's see, is there any technical difference? Upward, 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 upward. Yeah, there shouldn't be any difference. Yeah, they're pronounced exactly the same. Upward, upward. Technically, the ARD ending or WARD ending, I think it can be pronounced a little bit different, but we usually just say it as like that's just the standard way to say it. With the exception of toward. So 2 plus ward becomes toward. So even the oo in the 2 disappears. It's that's a special case. But upward, downward, northward, southward, forward, etc., etc., etc. Is the T in the word after similar to the Spanish T? No. The Spanish T is the. That's more of a dental thing, and you don't necessarily have to touch the teeth. I'm pretty sure the Spanish T and D touches the teeth normally. I do know that when we do the dental T or D variation of the TH sound in American English, remember it replaces a TH in English, not a T or a D. You don't actually have to touch the teeth. You could just make it like flatter on the top, and it'll sound duller, which is what we're looking for. But when we say after, we're not making it a flatter, more dull T or D sound. And I've talked about this before. The when you have T after F, K like actor, S like I don't know, master. The S is a little bit special because S is the physical way that S works. But in all those cases, it softens the T, makes it sound kind of like a weak D. And remember, the weak versions of the stop sounds, t, d, p, b, k, g, the weak versions sound very similar between the voice and the voiceless. If I say happy, happy, that almost sounds kind of like a B. But if I make it a B, like a soft, weak B, it would be happy, 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 happy. Very small difference in sound because we're not pushing out that p for the P. And so it makes it sound similar to the voiced one. This, right, in the case of like after, actor, master, it's a weak T. And so because of the sounds before, that's kind of interacting with it in a special way, it really kind of just sounds like a weak D, but it's not the Spanish T. If I were to use the Spanish T in this word, I would say after, or let me keep the after, after, after. And that's, people are going to be like, what are you saying? It's definitely going to give you a gigantic accent if you try to do that. Especially since that the sound in English is only for the TH. So if anything, people might think you're saying this. Like that's how the English speaking brain is going to interpret it, as a TH, after, which that's not a word. This thing, does the TH get dropped or become a weak TH, tongue behind the teeth? This thing. Let's see, what can we do here? So you can go from the S to the TH. Fully enunciated, this thing. So you go from the S into a nice good TH. That would be fully enunciated. You could do this thing. Go from the S into the dental T. That also works. This thing's really interesting. In faster speech, you can drop the TH because S and TH sound very similar already. If you're speaking sort of on the slower end of normal, or you're speaking more slowly and more enunciated, then dropping it, like say like this thing is interesting. It's kind of, it's like what? But if you're speaking on the faster end of normal or really fast, this thing is interesting. This thing is interesting. This thing is interesting. It's perfectly fine. You could just drop it. So again, the speed is a factor, right? We know this is an element. But there are like 3 things that you can do there. Are intonation and rhythm different? Yes. Intonation, okay. Rhythm is the, this may not be technically accurate in terms of music terms, but to put it in a simple way, rhythm is kind of like the underlying beat and structure of the flow of sounds. And that has to do with like stressed and unstressed. And you can even think of music, right? Like if you have some drums or something, and you go do 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 do, right? It's like small, small, big, small, small, big, small, small, big, right? One is shorter, quieter, da, 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 and then da. Well, I guess it's not shorter, but it's quieter, right? And so different languages use, the length of a syllable and the loudness of a syllable in different ways. It creates different rhythms, et cetera, et cetera. So the rhythm is kind of like the underlying structure of the beats that underlies the music of the language. The intonation, intonation is like the coloring of the syllable. So if I say just a simple sentence, if I say, I don't like dogs, I don't like dogs, I don't like dogs. So by default, the focus there is on dogs. That's the thing I don't like. That's what I'm talking about. I don't like dogs. Okay. If I say I don't like dogs, so I'm changing my intonation, I'm shifting it, I'm coloring don't, giving it more focus. That's not strictly intonation necessarily, but I'm emphasizing that I don't, because maybe you think I do, and I'm clarifying, no, I don't. There's a purpose for that. Now, if I say, let's see here. Okay, let's say I say it this way. I don't like dogs. I don't like dogs. Now I'm drawing it out too, but I'm sort of changing. I'm giving this sort of stronger sound to it. I don't like dogs. Okay. Makes it sound like I'm kind of frustrated. I'm kind of angry. Like, hey, you're not listening. I've told you this a million times. I don't like dogs, right? Or if I say, see, so there's some uses of intonation where we're like moving the focus around to emphasize or to clarify. I'm trying to think of a case where it's a little bit different. I'm trying to think of a context. Okay, if I say something like, I don't like dogs. I don't like dogs. So even I'm kind of messing a little bit with the rhythm there. And I'm not saying like, I don't like dogs, like one big flow. It's like, I don't like dogs. And especially if I follow that up, let's say, I don't like dogs, but if you want to bring your dog, that's fine. It's one way to say it. It colors it. It makes it sound like, in this case, like there's some hesitation, right? Like, I don't like dogs, but blah, 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 blah. So that's basically what the intonation is, like the coloring. And perhaps you can also group in the shifting of the focus. So they are different, yes. But the intonation obviously can affect the rhythm, right? And the flow of the sounds. Okay. Really, all these things kind of work together in harmony, and picking them apart and separating them only goes so far. Obviously, you kind of want to break things down and say, okay, this is how this works, this is how this works. But it's really one big whole that works in harmony, like an orchestra, right? You have a conductor, which would be the brain, right? And then you have all the different instruments, and they're all, playing their parts and playing in harmony. And so the intonation comes in here and the rhythm shifts there, and, et cetera, et cetera. And, the speed helps to, cut certain sounds short or to drop certain sounds, et cetera, et cetera. Or maybe to fully enunciate certain words if we're, speaking more slowly. And so it's this big dynamic orchestra flow that all works in harmony. And that's human speech. But anyway, I read that voice consonants are in fact unvoiced at the beginning of a word. What? No. Zebra, 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 zebra. Dogs, dogs, dogs. Definitely not for the stop ones. That would be weird. Let's see. Trying to think. TH. Okay, this. this. Very, very. It's what I would say is in a very, very short, very, very microscopic, I mean, super small way. That's something that maybe can happen. That didn't sound right. Something that maybe can happen. Yeah, anyway, I don't know. I think that was correct. But no, that's not supposed to happen. No. Wait, voice consonants aren't. No. I would completely disagree with that. Even in the flow of faster speech, no. Okay. Sorry, I'm joining in late. How is everyone? No problem, David. We had a technical glitch at the beginning where I was having some issues. So this is actually, that's why it's called like English Hacks live stream restart something, whatever. So yeah. I'm good. Hope everyone else is good. Sergio's good. Delia, I'd like to hear your thoughts on what Eliza Simpson, an accent coach, said with regards to the concept of vocal tract posture when it comes to learning an accent. Vocal tract posture refers to the way a speaker holds in the accent. There, that's not grammatically correct. Holds in the accent. Their jaw, their tongue, their lips, and this can function like a home base. So the sounds of the language will kind of orbit around this home base shape, like planets around the sun. And if you find it, allow those sounds become so much easier. They're within your grasp. It can feel like a hack. Once you get the posture, it's like now you have the cheat codes because now my tongue is perfectly in position to make that vowel before it was tricky. And Eliza Simpson also talks about how thinking sounds are sort of the litmus test of the posture. It's where all of the articulators want to go when they want to be as close as possible to all something. Okay. Vocal tract posture. Jaw, tongue, lips. I think that's kind of what I'm referring to as mouth placement, although I'm focusing a lot on the tongue. Again, I don't know all languages. If some languages hold the jaw in a very different way, which I mean, I would be kind of surprised by. I mean, like if you're speaking your language and you always like this is your default jaw position, and for some reason, like your language, you know, your jaw is just always like that, and you kind of have to like pull it back. It just seems kind of weird. Maybe some languages do that. I don't know. But tongue, the lips, obviously, yes. I mean, holding your lips in a certain way, that seems kind of weird, which is why I put so much emphasis on the tongue, because it's obviously the lips are important for certain things. The jaw, yes. I mean, you can have maybe some extra tension in your jaw that, or maybe not enough tension in your jaw that could be causing some minor problems. But I really think that the tongue is the biggest thing. So what she's talking about with vocal tract posture, I would basically just call mouth position. What was I saying? Not mouth position. Can't even remember what I was saying. Mouth placement, yeah. And I would largely agree with that. I like how she's describing it, right? Home base shape that's like the planets around the sun. Because yes. And can it make things easier? Yes. I do not think, I mean, I potentially, especially depending on how different your language is and how your default mouth placement is in your language, it could be a very important key for some speakers, or even just for the way you speak in your language. Some speakers kind of hold their mouths a little differently, maybe. So it can have a big impact, but I think overall, in general, especially because like as I demonstrated, trying to shift my posture, right, my vocal tract posture, I can still make all the same sounds. I can still sound like an American, right? Does it sound exactly the same as I normally do? No. So I think it's sort of that last little 1%. If you want to try to get it earlier, then you can. But I also think that's kind of difficult because it's like, okay, well, if you already know where the sounds are supposed to be, and then you try to shift it, then it's sort of just this little like, okay, you get this little shifting. Where if you try to shift your mouth placement before you know where any of the sounds are, then it's like, well, how do you know how to shift it? Like, to me, that doesn't really make any sense. Like, but if you know where the vowels are and then you're getting feedback and you're like, oh, it sounds kind of like maybe this is too far forward. Like you're saying, but you're saying like, It's like, oh, it sounds like you're kind of pushing it forward a bit. And you say, okay. So maybe my mouth placement is a little too far forward. And you kind of relax it back, and so knowing where the sounds are can actually help guide you to fix your mouth placement. And I don't think that is something that is a super difficult thing to fix after you get the sounds themselves, because you're not actually moving the sounds. You're sort of adjusting your default mouth position, like your tongue position. This is really hard to describe in the way that I'm thinking about it, but I hope that makes sense. I can see why it can be looked at as like a big hack and stuff, but as I said, if you do it, like if that's the first thing you do, I don't know how you would do it. Like maybe if you have some familiarity or you have some talent or, you have experience with other languages and you're kind of aware of how your tongue feels and stuff, and then you learn, okay, my language uses a more forward position. Then straight from the beginning, you could say, okay, let me try to adjust my mouth position and say the sounds from there instead. But it just, I don't know. I think it's a lot easier to tweak it after you know where the sounds are. And then everything just kind of falls into place. And I think for probably a lot of learners, not all learners, of course, I do think for a lot of learners, it's not going to make that big of a difference anyway. So, yeah, I mean, I largely agree with her, but at the same time, I don't think it's some magic key that, unlocks everything. Okay, so where was I before? And I think you probably have more, Hector, but I'll continue that thread when I get down there. The company announced that it will break out Reality Labs, its hardware division, into its own reporting segment starting in the fourth quarter. What does break out mean in the sentence? Well, I think it should be break Reality Labs out into its own reporting segment. I guess you could put breakout together, but so there's multiple divisions of the company, right? There's the hardware division and I assume the software division. Before, maybe because the company was small enough, it was all just one thing. Okay, you guys do hardware, you guys do software. Now the company is growing, and so we're going to say, okay, instead of having like everything be together, we're going to sort of break this off and make it its own little thing underneath the company instead of being integrated with everything else. That would be the basic idea. I don't know exactly specifically what they're going to do, how they're going to do that, if they're going to make it like a separate company that's owned by the parent company or how they're going to do that, but that's what it means. You're separating it in some way. Okay. So it's into its own reporting segment. So in that context, so before the reporting for the company was just everything, right? It was just this is how well we did this quarter. But now they're going to say, okay, now Reality Labs, the hardware division, is going to have its own report, right? It's going to be broken out, taken out of the whole thing. So there's going to be the hardware division and then everything else as two separate reports instead of one big report. So it makes sense. You're breaking it, you're taking it, removing it from everything else and putting it out into its own reporting. What you and did you? Is that correct in formal, informal speech? Okay, so well, your transcription of what and you does not work. That would be like would you. If you do would you, that has to be what did you, not what you. What you could either be what you, where you enunciate the T, not likely. You can stop the T, what you, which is super common, happens maybe half the time, what you, or what you, where you blend the T and the Y into ch. That happens about the other half of the time. If you say would you will only be interpreted as this, what did you? If you say did you, that would be correct, did you, but except you're doing it like did you. It's not you, it's Jew. It's actually blending into j. Okay, did you, and the Y is disappearing. It's not did you, did you, Jew. There's no Y anymore. Can you use it in formal speech or informal speech? Some of these things do tend to be used just in informal speech. If you're trying to say what did you as what'd you do, that could be a little informal, but I think that's just a part of normal standard speech. It doesn't really matter. Did you, that's also just part of normal standard speech. A lot of these blending things, because most teachers teach you guys like, okay, you should enunciate, you should speak clearly, you should do all this stuff. And of course, that's not how people actually speak. And then, sometimes they'll say, okay, well, in informal speech, right, you can do this, like wanna or tryna or, these different things. When a lot of these things, some of them are part of informal speech, but most of these sort of blendings and contractions and stuff have nothing to do with formality. It's just part of the normal flow of speech, regardless of if you're in a formal situation or an informal situation. So, like if you say a lot of the times what makes it sound informal is if you're breaking the grammar. So what you, okay, like if I say, is that what you want? Okay, that's perfectly fine grammar. Is that what you want? What you want? But if I want to say, what do you want? And grammatically, I'm dropping do and then blending the t and the y. So instead of saying, what do you want? If I say, what you want, that's broken grammar. And that sounds informal because it's broken grammar. Okay. And that's different than what and you going together grammatically correctly. Like, is that what you want? But it's a good question. Yeah. Fernando, hello. Is what's your address pronounced as what's your address? Good question. Yeah, this is an interesting one. It can be, yes. So we have what's your, that's a little more enunciated. So there's the TS, which is not actually a T there. It's just an S being pushed through the T position. Going into that Y, what's your, what's your, and your, of course, is usually your. So we say the instead of or. That's one way to say it. And I always want to emphasize that because there's usually more than one thing that can happen. And also the structure of your question, you say, is it pronounced this way? Well, it's not pronounced that way. It can be pronounced that way, right? There's usually a fully enunciated way. And then there's some weird things that can happen, blending sounds and whatever, that is not fully enunciated, but is still very normal, more normal speech. So what's your address? That's perfectly fine. You'll hear that in normal speech. Or can we say, now I wouldn't say what's your address. Maybe if we're not reducing the your or the your to your, but we usually reduce your to your. So what's your sounds a little bit weird. If you say what's your address? What's your address? Now, the reason why this can work, it's sort of a special case. We're dropping the S, we're blending the t and the y into ch. And again, this is a special case. It's weird. Normally things like this don't happen. But probably because what is contracted to what's plus your is a relatively common combination, stuff like this can happen. Yes. What's your address? What's your address? And technically, it's really a fast way of saying what's your, except we're just completely skipping that S. We're not taking the time to say the S. And so the T and the Y just kind of end up blending, just like incidentally, not necessarily like we're trying to say it that way. It just kind of comes out that way. What's your? So yes, it can be pronounced that way. Perfectly fine. Not informal. It's just normal speech. The info I read was in Cambridge book, so it should be reliable. Are you talking about the R's? Okay, so Cambridge is a British source, or no, not the R's. Yeah, so the voice consonants are in fact unvoiced at the beginning of words. I assume that's what you're referring to, since that was your more recent question. Yeah, Cambridge is a British source, perhaps in British English. There's a slight chance that maybe it's just something I haven't noticed, because there's still things that I'm still noticing about English, because being a native speaker, you know, I was never conscious about a lot of this. But I just, it doesn't make any sense to me. It just doesn't make any sense. As I said, I guess maybe it can happen, but it's definitely not supposed to happen. So yeah. And if it does happen, it's going to be so microscopic that nobody's really going to notice. Like maybe if you're really, really listening, right? You're really, really listening. You're like, oh, okay. Yeah. So technically there's like this like 0.01 second of an S before the Z. That's irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant. That's just because, okay, the breath started coming out before the voice was activated. I don't think it really means anything. It's just the breath and the voice didn't start at the exact same moment. Who cares? It doesn't matter. It's still Z or V or whatever it is. I would completely disregard that. That's stupid. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. I don't know, but I think that's stupid. Something about a cat in a box. Okay. Dila deleted some messages. Unfortunately, that's okay. Have you ever heard native speakers pronounce iron like I run? Okay, instead of iron. And for environment, yeah. Okay, good questions. So yes, iron is supposed to be iron, like I earn, but sort of flowing really, really well, like blending iron. It's actually supposed to be an R colored I, which we know you don't have to actually R color. You can link with a small W and say iron, just like I plus earn. Those two words, I and earn, would never be, well, would they never be? I earn a lot of money. Well, I guess you could blend them into an R colored I, but they're not supposed to be blended into a diphthong. They're supposed to be linked with a small Y sound, and you can do the same thing in the word iron. Okay. Now, the question is, have I heard a native speaker pronounce it as iron? Unfortunately, yes. Not very commonly, and it sounds super annoying whenever I hear it. It's just like, it's like nails on a chalkboard. It's like, why are you saying it that way? That's not how you pronounce the word. I know there's variation, but so you know, I accept it, but I don't know why they're saying it that way. It's very, very strange to me. Again, very rarely have I heard somebody pronounce it that way. So it's a variation on how to say it. I wouldn't recommend it personally, but whatever. For environment, so I say environment, some people environment. Yes, some people say environment, which doesn't stand out too much, but that also sounds kind of annoying. It's another way to say it. Environment. In fact, we can, instead of saying environment, we can say environment, and sort of shift that N at the end of the earn into the M and just make it an M sound. Environment. Yeah. Good questions. Enhanced senses. how do you go from enhanced to senses in a way that's relaxed as opposed to super enunciated? Enhanced senses. You drop the T, which is spelled as a D, but it's a T sound. Enhanced. You just drop it. Enhanced senses. Enhanced senses. Enhanced senses. Enhanced senses. Yeah, so your enhanced senses. Notice before the S and enhance, there's an N. This creates the TS illusion, right? N plus S sounds exactly the same as T plus S because there's not actually a T there. We're in this position, we're pushing the S through. So it's not like you're doing one long regular S because the S in senses is just a regular S. But you're starting that first S after the N from that closed position, and then you're just holding that S a little bit longer into the next word and just dropping the T sound in between. Enhanced senses. Enhanced senses. Enhanced senses. Yeah. How do you pronounce that'd, it'd? I can barely hear the D sound, for instance. That'd be nice. Well, there could also be some shifting that happens, but if we talk about this in a broken down way, so fully enunciated would be that'd, it'd. So the T in that or the T in it would become a flat D. We're putting a little vowel between the T and the D at the end, and that's because it's physically impossible to go from T to D without releasing that T first. So we end up putting a little vowel between them, and that causes the T to become a flat D because now it's a weak D between two vowels, or weak T between two vowels, which flaps in American English. So that'd, there's just a little schwa there, that'd, it'd, it'd. You can stop the D at the end if you enunciate it a little bit more. That'd, it'd, that'd be nice. That'd be nice. It sounds a little more pushed out. A little more clearly enunciated. We're probably not going to say it that way. In the case of that'd be, we can actually shift that D into the B, right? This is assimilation, specifically what I call shifting, where we're going to go from that TDN position into the PBM position because that's the next sound. So instead of saying that'd be, you can either A, stop the D, and then do the B. That'd be. That's one way to do it. Or you can shift the D into the B position. That'd be nice. That'd be nice. That'd be nice. And so we're still flapping the D. We're still putting that little vowel sound there, but we're shifting it into a B and just dropping the D. That'd be nice. That'd be nice. Yeah. So it depends on what's after it, of what's exactly going to happen with the D, but the D itself could either be a weak D or more likely a stop D. Matt, welcome. I just saw that you're streaming and I wanted to come and ask a simple question. I'm trying to understand how lip rounding works with R. Can you say read for me first with lip rounding and then without lip rounding for the R sound, and then compare the two for me to understand the difference? Okay. Read. I wouldn't call it, I mean, I guess it could be looked at as lip rounding. I see why somebody would describe it that way. I probably wouldn't describe it as lip rounding, because lip rounding is what happens with O, oo, and ow, and the W. But yeah, we don't have to split hairs. If you like the term lip rounding and it makes sense to you, then fine. What's really happening with the R, it's the same like if I say shh, 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 or shh, shh, or there might be a very slight little difference there with the exact tension in the lips, but it's very, very similar. There's some sounds that naturally push the lips out like that. And it's more like the lips are kind of coming up and maybe out a little bit, rather than actually rounding. The way I think of rounding is like there's actually like this rounding motion, like oh, where it's actually rounding out. But aside from that, so read, okay. Read. Okay, so the second one, I was trying not to push my lips out. You saw the sides were a little bit different. That's primarily because of the E, I think. E, E. See, we don't have to do the lips, but re. It's very natural for us to pull the lips back a little bit with the E. It's not required for the sound. It's very natural for us to push the lips out with the R. It's not required for the sound. If I'm speaking very quickly, read it, read it, read it, read it, read it. There might be a little bit like you probably saw, read it, read it, read it, instead of read it, read it. Okay, so there's this whole range of what the lips can do from this sort of fully enunciated lip R position all the way to just slight to nothing. It doesn't really matter that much. Yeah. If you're going to use the lips, you want to make sure that there's lots of, it's very open, right? Because when we do O, ooh, ow, or more tightly, W, ooh, okay, ooh is just this tiny little thing. Lips come far out, ooh, okay? And it creates this little hole. That's the rounding. O, ooh, ow, they don't close quite as much, but there it comes around, right? If you're doing okay, notice This is part of why I don't call it rounding, because it's not actually getting all that round. It feels like the muscles in the top and bottom lips are kind of coming up and out a little bit, and then they're just static there. And so you want to make sure that there's a big gap there. If you're trying to do like, it's probably not really going to work. Now, hold on, let me redo that. Right, 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 right. Okay, so you can do it that way. Read. Okay, so I guess there's more of a range to it than I think by default. I wasn't consciously aware of that. Yeah, good. So I guess you can go all the way as far as the W position, which is probably one reason why WR is a common spelling pattern, but there's no actual W sound there. I mean, at the end of the day, as I said, it's sort of a moot point because you don't need to do it to make the sound. Very open, I guess. But you're welcome. Yes. Things, yeah. So can you raise the A just a little bit? Actually, before I do that, this actually makes perfect sense to me. I'm going to plug this into my general formula of the range of speech, because this actually makes sense. So if I were to really emphasize a word that starts with R, like if I say right, but I want to really say like no, yeah, that's right, right. I'm much more likely to really stick those lips out. But if I'm just sort of in the flow, I'm not particularly trying to make that stand out or anything, I'm probably more likely to say, oh no, that's right, that's right, that's right, that's right. Maybe there's a little bit, but it doesn't come all the way out, right? I think in terms of the lips, this is just talking about the lips. So, because as I said, the lips are not required for the sound itself. But fully enunciated, fully articulated consonant, at least, perhaps also the vowel, would have the lips coming all the way out. That's like the super clear, proper way, I guess, to say it. We spend most of our time here, which is probably why I didn't even think about sticking the lips all the way out until it kind of occurred to me while I was explaining that. So we don't tend to stick the lips out that much. And then if you're speaking really quickly, you really don't have to use the lips at all. Even in here, you don't have to use the lips at all, but it's a common natural thing that happens. So yeah, I think it's part of that range of the fully enunciated R, specifically focused on the lips part of it. That explains it perfectly. Okay, anyway, can you raise the A just a little bit? The I diphthong when it's unstressed. I guess in the I diphthong. So the start of the I diphthong. Can you raise it? So the exact articulation of I isn't necessarily a super concrete thing. There's a little bit of a range that you can do with it. Raising it, I mean, I guess maybe. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that. But I will say it's extremely common to cut the diphthong, where we just drop the I part at the end and just say the ah. You can't do that in slower speech because then it sounds like you have like a southern accent, because they tend to not say the I at the end just normally. But if you say like, I didn't, I didn't, then we cut the end of the diphthong off, and that's perfectly fine. I'm not. Can you elaborate what you mean by raising the A? I think I kind of might know, but I want to make sure. Kind of like how you can raise. Okay, I see. And go for a lazy A. Okay, I see. Yeah. I. I would say no. That doesn't seem like a distinct way to make the sound. It just seems like maybe if like I'm just not articulating the sound as clearly, which I mean is kind of what we're doing with the lazy A, but it's I don't know how to explain the difference that I'm thinking of and that I feel here, but I wouldn't categorize it as the same. No. You could just not say I as clearly, you know. So I mean, I guess technically, yeah, you can raise it, but be careful with the term raising, because when we're talking about we're talking about raising. That's actually the back in the middle of the tongue, where the lazy the placement in the front would be just not as open. So it's about the open and closedness of the mouth, not the raising of the tongue. Yeah. Is the stream's part about tongue blade loss for humankind? Yes. Yes, it is. Okay, yeah, so I answered that earlier. I looked it up, and I see why you would be asking, because it seems kind of confusing and there are not a lot of good resources or whatever. But the blade, I'm not completely sure. It's probably either the tip or right? Just like on a sword, you have the blade goes around the part that cuts, and then you have the body, because they talk about the body of the tongue, which would right? But specifically, I think it would refer to the tip of the tongue. Yes, I don't know. So I don't use terms like that, like, because it's confusing. I would say the front of the tongue, the tip of the tongue, right? That's clearer what we mean. I assume blade would actually refer to the whole thing, because if I think like, okay, like all around the edge of your tongue, I would probably call it that. The edge is a blade edge. Yeah. Before the NG sound, we raise the, I guess, E sound to I, as in walking sounds like walking. But does it also happen in words like English increase and increment? Okay, so some speakers might do that. Okay, I've talked about the NG and the ING specifically before. And I would recommend go watching that, especially the ING hack. But okay, this before NG we raise E to I, so walking sounds like walking. Okay. The way that some Americans speak is that the ING, there's the added ING and then just the core ING, like in sing. Okay. The added ING and the core ING for these speakers is I, Okay, it's not E, it's I. And they use right, the ng after it. So they'll say sing, 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 and they'll also say walking, ing. Okay. The way that some other speakers speak, such as myself, is that this is never I. Now, it could maybe come out as I. It's actually kind of a range. It doesn't matter if you hit E or I, except with one technical case, because it can switch it to the informal version. But the way that speakers such as myself say it, which again, this doesn't really create much of an accent. It's still a completely neutral way to speak. For the core ing, like sing, notice I'm not saying sing, I'm saying e, sing, sing. So it's e plus it's not that it's being raised or anything's moving. That's just the way that the sound is created, the word is said. With walking, when we have the added ing, the way that speakers like me speak, we still say e. It's never I, unless we're doing the informal version, like I'm walking down the street. It sounds like in. But if we're not doing that specific version, we're just saying the word walking, it's e plus n, regular n, not and that's how I speak. That's how many Americans speak. It's probably, there's like half of us probably do one and half of us probably do the other. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. So whichever one you want to do is fine. But this whole like raising before the ng, like that's a whole bunch of whatever. I don't want to say it's nonsense, because maybe there's speakers who do that, but it's definitely a rule that you don't have to pay attention to. Rule. Okay, anyway, does also have in words like English, increase, increment. Okay, so English is E, right? English. I'm going ing. So to me, at least the way that I say this, it's E plus ing, just like walking or sing, or sorry, not walking. What am I doing? Walking would be a normal. Sing, ing, okay? Now the E can sort of reduce to like an I type sound. English, and it would still be That's fine. You can do that. In the word increase and increment, these are supposed to be front ends. They're supposed to be normal ends. Increase, increment. And if you fully enunciate them, that's how you should say them. If you're emphasizing, no, it's an increase. We're going to hear in. Now, because there's a K sound after it, we get shifting. So instead of doing here, we end up doing here plus the K after. So it's increase. So it's a back end or increment. And you can even emphasize it that way if you want, but it's supposed to be a regular N in like the perfect form. So those are just the vowel at the start of increase and increment are I sounds. English is an E sound that can turn into an I. So I don't even know how this it wouldn't really match with what we're talking about before. Anyway, yeah. I heard a guy saying, when's the last time? But the other person answered with past tense. So my question is, what is the apostrophe S for? When is the last? Oh, okay. Yes. Was will never contract. Okay. That should be 100% rule. I can't think of any exception to that. Was does not contract, because if we were to contract was, we wouldn't know if it's present or past. Okay. Now notice the question is, when's the last time? If we don't contract it, yes, we would probably say when was the last time. Or we could say when is the last time? When is the last time you did that? This is actually, it's probably broken grammar, but it sounds very natural and normal. You can actually use the present tense or the past tense here, and it doesn't actually matter. Properly, it's probably supposed to be when was with no contraction. But in order to speak faster, we probably ended up changing it to is, and so now when is the last time sounds perfectly fine. We can contract it now because we don't contract was. At least not in any way that I can think of. So yeah, it's a weird case. It's a weird case. Does the sentence sound natural to you? The WHO has adopted various preventing strategies, one of which staying home is the most crucial. Maybe with some added punctuation, it could, yes. So the WHO has adopted various preventing strategies, one of which, staying home, is the most crucial. Most crucial. Okay, so one of which, and then maybe like dashes, right, or put in parentheses. So one of which, staying home. Notice the shift in intonation, the pauses. We're giving an example. One of which, staying home, is the most crucial. If you say it that way, yes, it's perfectly fine. But without the proper punctuation there, if I were to read it like one of which staying home is the most crucial, it doesn't have the right intonation and it sounds weird. Hello, Lucky. Welcome. David. I recently stumbled upon a meme involving Kendall Jenner. Where are we at? 107. Okay. We have about an hour left. I recently stumbled upon a meme involving Kendall Jenner where she's saying her name, but instead of Kendall, her name apparently comes out sounding like candle. Hmm. Plug this in. First. Mm-hmm. To me, she's very, very clearly saying Kendall, but I can explain what's going on there. So I don't hear candle. I understand how some speakers might hear candle. I don't know where she's from. I would assume maybe the West Coast because that would line up very nicely, but I don't pay attention to these people. I don't know where they're from. It has nothing to do with the Valley Girl accent. I would probably look at this as remember in Western American English, it's not required. It's not something you have to do. But many Western Americans, they have a slight lowering of I and eh, not to where they sound like the next sound, but they sound a lot closer to the next sound. So I can kind of sound a bit more like eh can sound a bit more like ah, but they're not. They're still the same sounds. They're just a slight lowering of them. And that's what I'm hearing here. I'm hearing that she's sort of using this lowered, like slightly lowered eh that sounds closer to ah, but to my ears, it's still very, very clearly an eh sound. It's not ah. So yeah, isn't it just California accent? I noticed that a lot of people with pin-pen merger, so I think that it goes both ways. That is reasons it was lowering. You can check the wiki page for SoCal accent. There's a section that explains that, but I don't know if natives perceive that lowering. We don't usually perceive it, no. If you're not from the West Coast, and I wouldn't even say it's a California thing. It's part of Western American English. Not all speakers use it. But people who are maybe from other parts of the country, they might be a little thrown off by it, perhaps. I don't think it causes a big problem. I don't think most people really notice it too much. But apparently, I mean, given this, it's something that stood out to people. But in the flow of normal speech, I don't think it would make much difference. The pin-pen merger is a very limited thing. I think it is maybe sort of expanding, originating around the Bakersfield area, if I remember right. Pin-pen is not, at least maybe I'm wrong. I'm not up to date in all like the most cutting edge research and this and that, whatever. I'm not an expert on, dialectical variations, but in my experience, my understanding, the pin-pen merger is a very limited thing that does exist in some Californian speakers' pronunciation. And it's something that you should probably just completely ignore unless you want to adopt it for some reason. Then you can, but yeah, it doesn't really matter. I personally, I would recommend not using the pin-pen merger because number one, since it is a relatively limited change, so it's going to sound probably regional. But number two, it's just not as clear. Like, I mean, the context usually makes it clear, but like, oh, can you pass me that pen? That pen? Probably, especially like, okay, if you're going to write something, it's pen, right? But it'll stand out. I think it's going to give you a bit of a regional accent. Once you said the A diphthong uses the same tongue shape, not the same tongue placement of E, but in the word idiot, I feel like the E sound has the same tongue shape of and it would make sense since the next sound is Okay. A diphthong uses the same tongue shape of E. No. Wait, sorry, hold on. Place. See, I'm thinking of the placement. Tongue shape. Okay, hold on. E. A. Okay, no, yeah, so I was saying the start of the A diphthong has a bit of a similar shape. How it feels in my mouth, it has a bit of a similar shape to E. Obviously, yes, we're not talking about the placement. It's not the same height or anything. And that is also relatively compared to E, which feels a lot flatter. So yes, okay. The shape is similar. But the word idiot, idiot, idiot. I feel like the E sound has the same tongue shape of E. Idiot. I'm not sure how this word applies to what you're talking about because there's no A diphthong in idiot. Which is an I sound. D, which is, well, it's going to be flapped. But flap D into E. And then we're going to get a small Y linking into the it or ut at the end. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be it, but I would do like idiot. Something like this. Idiot. Idiot. I'm not sure how that applies. What I mean is that E feels a lot flatter in that word. Idiot. 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 E. E. Idiot. 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 E. 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 Idiot. 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 I mean, you can make the E a little more shallow, where you don't like push it all the way up into E. But it doesn't feel any flatter to me. It's still the same basic shape and position and everything. If I try to flatten it out, it would be like it. As soon as I try to flatten it out, it starts sounding like like idiot, or something like that. It's idiot. Just to be clear, I don't mean where the tongue. Yeah, okay. I think so too. Shifting the vowels would be the most obvious way speakers use vowels are more standard. Can we also talk about the fact that Joaquin Phoenix is pronounced like Joaquin? Yeah. So you get a Joaquin Phoenix. Exactly. Yeah. Phoenixes are supposed to fly, but this one walks. Joaquin Phoenix. Joaquin Phoenix. Joaquin Phoenix. Joaquin Phoenix. There's a little difference in the intonation, though. Joaquin Phoenix. So if I were to use a walking, like walking, it would be Joaquin Phoenix, Joaquin Phoenix, Joaquin Phoenix, Joaquin Phoenix. Where if I do his name, Joaquin Phoenix, Joaquin Phoenix, Joaquin Phoenix, like Tom Jones, Tom Jones. It's on that first name. It's sort of like saying the difference between like the White House and a White House, White House, White House, White House, White House. It's this little shift between the two that makes it, you know, like a proper noun or whatever. There's a little tiny difference in the focus, I guess you could say, like which word gets the focus. But otherwise, the sounds are identical, yes. So we would pronounce them the same. I think that Americans unround the first half of the O diphthong because Canadians say that with a really rounded O and it sticks out like a sore thumb. What do you think? Do you unround the first half of the diphthong? So this is not how I would explain it. It's not that we unround the diphthong or the first half of the diphthong. It's that we tend to get lazy and or we cut the diphthong. So it's the same with, say, O and oo. Fully enunciated O, 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 or oo, 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 ooh, ooh. In the flow of normal speech, we're not going to take the time to really bring it all around and, you know, fully enunciate it. We're going to say oh, 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 ooh, 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 ooh. So it doesn't really look like the same thing. There's the same basic little motion and mechanics going on there, but you can clearly tell it's not, you know, it's, you could even say maybe it's unrounded compared to the fully enunciated version. Same thing with ow, right? Ow, ow, ow. If I fully enunciate it, ow, 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 right? It's coming all the way around. But if we're just speaking normally, ow, 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 it's still there. Ow, 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 ow. It's just not being fully enunciated. Again, this is on that range from fully enunciated to faster speech. This affects all sounds. That's the reality. And I think a lot of researchers aren't quite aware of that concept. I wasn't aware of the concept either. I sort of, as far as I know, I'm the one who has conceptualized that range. And it explains a lot of things about American English, probably languages in general, because many languages probably do something similar. But within the context of American English, everything kind of fits onto that range. So it's not that Americans unround the first half. It's just that when we're speaking normally, we don't fully enunciate the sound. Like, that's it. And again, we can kind of cut the diphthong a bit. So instead of saying like ow, we say ow, 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 ow. Now that would be maybe a fully unrounding, but we're dropping that sort of ooh at the end. We're just doing that first ah part, which is the A like an I. So that would make sense that the lips don't really get activated at all because we're cutting the diphthong, which would be a sort of an even less enunciated version of the sound. So it's still on that range. Okay, can I reduce asked to asked? Yes. And it's not really reducing, I would say. I mean, you could look at it as reducing, I guess, but okay, whatever. Just, yeah. It's kind of hard for me to say it fully meaning a Y there, fully enunciated when talking fast. And what about desktop? Yes, desktop. Exactly, yeah. Remember, we don't tend to like multiple consonant sound, or like 3 consonant sounds together. And what we generally tend to do when we have that is we drop the middle one. So SK plus T, which we know asked because of the K, it's actually a T sound. The E is silent and the D is pronounced as a T. So we get sk. We don't like that. So we'll drop the K and we'll just say asked. Right. And we know it's past tense because we're keeping that T part. Plus, if it's present tense, we say ask, and it'd be a K. With desktop, same thing. It's on my desktop. So that's just a basic application of that sort of like 3 consonant cluster rule, more or less. I think there are cases where that doesn't necessarily apply, but because I think I noticed 1 or 2 cases and I forgot to write them down, but that's a pretty solid rule. Like if you have 3 consonant sounds like that together, one of them is probably going to drop, and it's usually going to be the middle one. It could also partially be connected to having multiple stop sounds together, because like the k and the t, like we don't want to push out both of those. It's kind of like asked. It's kind of uncomfortable. Or desktop. It's just easier to drop that middle sound. So it's pretty common in rapid speech. Yes. It's also pretty common in normal speech. It doesn't have to be super fast. Like he asked me yesterday. He asked me. Perfectly fine. Don't know about desktop. Yeah. You have a lesson on words like lists, asks. So I'm wondering if this rule could be applied to drop the K sound in asked. Yeah. Yeah. It's the same concept. Yeah. Asked. Okay. Interesting. I actually didn't connect these two. I'm glad you mentioned this. So when we're talking about like lists and asks, that's actually not the same. We're not dropping the T or the K, or wasps. We're not dropping it. We're doing a lighter version where we're not actually pronouncing the sound. So like asks, right? Fully enunciated, yes, you push out a K, asks, right? But you can, as you're doing that S, asks, and then you keep that S, but you bring up the back of your tongue to get close to the K, but don't actually close it. And then just keep going to the next S. It creates the illusion of the K, allows us to speak faster. That's not what's happening with asked and desktop. Those Ks are completely disappearing. That would be like in bankruptcy. We'll drop the T, bankruptcy. Okay. So it's actually not the same thing, but now that you mention these, and I have them both in my head, the thing like with lists or asks is probably coming out of the fact that we don't like those three consonant clusters. But because we have an S and then an S, instead of completely dropping the sound, we can't quite completely drop the sound. If I say he asks, like maybe if I'm speaking really quickly or something, like, yeah, okay, lists, sure, I can like sort of re-push out the S a little bit. There needs to be sort of something there. Otherwise, it just sounds like an S, like he asks. What? Maybe very, very lazily. But anyway, the point is that we tend to get a little bit of this K or T or whatever anyway, so that it's still clearly that word, even though we're not actually saying it. And so we're kind of, we might completely drop it, possibly, I guess, or we might just sort of not actually fully push it out and just like do the illusion of the sound. And it's probably based on that bigger rule of dropping the middle consonant. Yeah, interesting case. But again, because of the two S's are around it, we can keep that S flowing. So it makes it special. It's a little more A-like. Yeah, so I was talking about with idiot. A little more idiot. Idiot. Okay, I can kind of see what you're saying. Like it's still an E. Maybe it's a little more I know what you're trying to say. I wouldn't describe it that way. But I think you're perceiving something that is there. It's just it's something that doesn't matter. It probably has to do partially with like because we're flapping the D and then having to move forward, so we have to like tap and push, and something with the mechanics of the sounds being used. I mean, if it still sounds like an E, then it doesn't matter if it's not like a perfect, super clear E, right? So that's it. I would just not worry about it. I'm still a bit confused about this. Are vegetable and fruit considered countable or uncountable in English? Well, I have one vegetable. I I have 2 vegetables. I have 1 fruit. I have 2 fruits. Is that right? I have 2 fruits. There are 2 fruits on the table. 2 fruit on the table. Interesting. For fruit and fruits, but they both sound good, which means probably the S is wrong. Vegetables with an S, I don't see why that would be singular. Like, I don't see why we would not add the S. Do you like vegetables? How many vegetables are there? Like, I don't know if maybe I'm misunderstanding the question. I know why fruit, because we say fruit and vegetables instead of fruits and vegetables, but some people also say fruits and vegetables instead of fruit and vegetables. Probably what's happening, the S on vegetables, I think, is just normal and correct, and maybe I'm wrong, but if I were to not use the S, it doesn't even sound right at all. So with the fruit, this is probably something that's changing. It's just aligning with the other general rules, because we want to add the S there if it is plural. And yes, some words, like, we say, I don't know, fish. Some people actually are starting to say fishes, right? Which is wrong. It doesn't particularly sound very good. But maybe 100 years from now, fishes is just going to be the normal way to say the plural of fish. But fish and fish is supposed to be singular and plural. So some things maybe haven't changed, or they're in the early stages of changing, but that I would just explain it as something that's in the process of changing. So I would consider them countable. Thanks for breaking down the word idiot. I didn't know it was pronounced with an I sound at the beginning. I thought it was an audiot or adiot. Definitely not. Definitely not. Interesting. Can you say melt and think about if the E sound lowered because of the L following it? Me, met, me, L, mel, me, mel, me, mel, mel, mel. Have you met him? Met. It melt. Have you met? L, L, L. I think I can see what you're talking about. I can do that without the L, but it doesn't happen as spontaneously. I think it's a byproduct of moving into that half L or dark L sound. It's not required, but I do notice that what can happen is the E maybe kind of gets pushed down a little bit as we're shifting into the ul, but it starts in the same position. It's not like it's lower and then goes into ul. It's still there, but it doesn't have to, it can sort of be pushed down a little bit as you shift backwards. So no, the L doesn't lower the E as a starting position or anything. And that, again, it's not required to do that. You can just have a regular E with no lowering at all and just go straight into ul. I recommend a few movies, like 5, and say maybe there's more, but I can only remember of those. No, of. I can only remember those. Those is the correct word there. Maybe there's more, but I can only remember those. Yeah, those is perfectly fine, but no of. Yeah, it's a very Spanish Portuguese type mistake to add of there. Cidade de Deus is a classic. I love that movie. Same here. Is that the correct word there? I struggle when I'm texting. Technically, there's nothing near or close to me, so this or these is not a possibility in my mind. According to your correction of those phrases, I think I might understand this, that, these, those a lot better. Okay, so I see. Okay, so going back to the first one then, yeah, those is the correct word. Maybe there's more, but I can only remember those. And it's because you're right. You recommend the movies. It's like movie, movie, movie. It's like you're throwing them out there, right, into the dialogue, into the conversation, and now they're there, right? And so then you say, okay, maybe there's more, but I can only remember those, meaning the ones that I mentioned. So they're not physically, near or far from you, but because they were mentioned at some point in the conversation, you're pointing back and saying those that I mentioned before. It's like you're pointing back to that point in time when you mentioned the movies, or you're pointing to them within like the collective. It's like if you're talking to somebody, right? The what you're talking about is sort of in the shared bubble between you, and it's like you're pointing to it. So there's two ways to look at it. But that or those would be, and then the corresponding there, pointing, oh, it's there in the conversation. Those are the words that we would use. Yes. For the second one, so blah, Cidade de Deus, whatever, is a classic. I love that movie. That is the correct word, yes. But it depends. So, and this could also apply to the previous one. Let's say you have the movie here, right? Or the movie is starting to play, right? And you say, Cidade de, I can't even say, I don't speak Portuguese. Cidade de Deus is a classic. I love this movie, okay? Because you're either starting to watch it, it's playing, or because you're holding the movie, right? Then you would use this because it's like you're actively engaged with it here. It's happening now. Or you're holding the physical movie. But if, like, say somebody mentions it, say like, oh, have you ever seen Cidade de Deus? And you say, oh, Cidade de Deus is a classic. I love that movie, right? So again, it's like it's in the conversation, or it's something that they mentioned, and you're pointing to that moment in the past that just happened. You say, oh, I love that movie that you said, right, that you mentioned. So yes, that would be the correct word. But again, context is important. Depends on the exact details, but that is a correct word that you could use there depending on what we're talking about. Wendell, welcome, Wendell. Oh, I see you got an upgrade to your symbol. Thank you for being a continued supporter. Does on Sunday have a logic, comprehensible logic? Why not the Sunday or in Sunday? Okay. It is logical, yes. I explained this in the book. I think I also have it in the video. Now, when we're asking questions, so remember okay, take a step back. When we're talking about the logic of prepositions or the logic of verbs or the logic of whatever, remember, we're using a logical approach to build the feeling. It's really the feeling that's under the surface that we're trying to develop here. And we're using logic to sort of understand and point and say, okay, that makes sense. When we ask the question of why not this option, another option could be perfectly logical, right? So you say Sunday. Okay, well, there's a day. I can look at a day as a container. It's a container of time, and I'm saying in Sunday. That's logical, but English doesn't do that. So remember, from a general logical perspective, not everything is going to work necessarily. Within the framework of the English language, which creates part of the personality of the English language, English says, well, this sounds okay. We're going to use, we're going to look at it logically this way. And sometimes you might have more than one option and say, okay, they both work. They're interchangeable. It doesn't matter. But maybe the personality of English, this is my way of explaining it, right? Like the personality of English says, okay, well, this is logical and we're going to use this. But then this is also logical in a very general sense, like it can make sense, but we're just not going to say that, right? And it's sort of a funny way to explain it, but I do think every language has its own personality that is semi-independent of the speakers of that language, and that evolves over time, very, very slowly. This is why grammar changes. This is why pronunciation changes, all this stuff. So just because something is logical, just because you can think of an alternative way that is logical in a general sense, doesn't necessarily mean that it's what we're going to use in English. But that being said, there is a logical reason or a way that we can think logically about why it happens to be this particular way. Why is it not this way? Because it's not. Sorry, it's not. This is just how it is. But why is it this way? Okay, we can explain it in some way. So the why not question, unfortunately, is just not a good question. It's just not that way. That's just how it is. But for on a day, there are, I think there's a couple ways that I tried to explain that in the book. One way that I like to look at it, so we talk about something on a calendar, right? And I think the calendar idea for days is really useful, even though it's kind of abstract and a little weird because, right? So if I have a wall or a table, and I write on the wall or on the table, right? We say on because it's a surface. One is this way, one is this way, but it's a surface, right? Okay. Now a calendar, right? I'll have, open the calendar. It says January and 1, 2, 3 different boxes, right? And I can hang that on the wall. I can put it on my desk, whatever. But I can still write stuff. So, okay, doctor's appointment, January 3rd. I put doctor's appointment in that box. So you can think of it like I'm physically writing on the calendar. And so it's on Wednesday. It's on Sunday. That's one way to think about it with the days that I think is sort of easy and makes sense. But that's kind of a surface explanation. It doesn't quite go all the way down under the surface. And so really what's happening is whatever day we're talking about, it's sort of like a focus. We say focus on. There's like a spotlight on, right? The light shines on something. And you can think of whether it's the current day today, or if I say I'll see you on Sunday, right? It doesn't have to be necessarily the current day, but whatever day we're talking about, it's sort of like a little platform. So it's like, okay, on this day, this happens. It's like you get on a stage, right? There's the stage for Sunday. And let's say on Sunday, you go to church or something, right? So what happens on stage, right? In the play of life, okay, I go to church on that day, right? So I'm on the stage of Sunday and church happens, right? Also under the surface, right, we know on is usually a surface or platform in some way, often abstract, but on is always a positive state or active state, which is a very abstract concept. And that's why we say the building is on fire or the light is on. But you can also think of it as like, okay, if we're talking about Sunday, if that is the active day that we are discussing, doesn't have to be today right now, but if I say, okay, I will see you on Sunday, that's the active day that I'm focusing on. Okay, so we're putting on that day, what's going to happen? It needs to support, right? It's not on Monday. Monday, there's no support there for this thing. I'm going to say, I'm going to see you on Sunday. That's platform, also active. I don't see you on Monday, it's not active. I see you on Sunday. That's when it will happen. That's when me seeing you comes into existence. It starts happening on Sunday. It's like the light turns on, right? So again, it's very abstract. Sometimes on is very, very, very abstract. But it should be more or less understandable how that is a logical way to look at it. And again, the important thing isn't the logic itself, it's building that feeling for what's going on under the surface, and how that connects to what we use above the surface, like on with days. Okay. Oh, yeah. Good question. Fully enunciated, it's supposed to be pronounced diphthong. PH is supposed to be an F sound, like photo or philosophy. However, the incorrect way or the lazy, less enunciated way, I use both, really. Sometimes I'll push out that F, it'll be diphthong. A lot of the times you'll hear me say diphthong, and I ignore the H and I just make it into a P. A lot of people do that. It's technically not right. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. But it should technically be diphthong. So if you want to be technically accurate, make it an F sound, not a P sound. Roger, do you drop the letter T in the word exactly? Yes. You can enunciate the T. You can say exactly. Usually we won't do that. Even if we're enunciating, if we're like emphasizing, we still probably won't say that T. And part of the reason why, again, this is actually like we were talking about earlier. I don't know if you were here, Roger. We have 3 consonants in a row. This is an L consonant, right? It's li, which is the light L, right? And so we have k to ul, drop the T, right? Exactly. So now we have a KL cluster. Exactly. So the T could be pushed out, fully enunciated, but even in that case, we probably don't. And you can just ignore the T in all cases. It doesn't matter. Is honey considered vegan? No. It's become my latest comfort food, especially the crystallized thick kind, but I wonder if I'm committing a vegan sin by consuming it. Yes, you are. You're eating the bee's honey without their consent. Consent has an S in the middle. Yes, so a little bit of a tangent here. Yeah, vegan is not honey. Honey is not vegan. Vegan is also not honey, so that's a true statement too. I'm of 2 minds here. Ideally, in an ideal world, yes, like, because there's, especially, we have these bee farms and this and that, blah, blah, blah. And, we take the honey and, we're exploiting the bees and selling their honey and this and that, whatever. And it makes sense. And it's not vegan. It's not vegan. Because remember, vegan, for those of you who don't know or who care, because many of you probably don't care, it's not just about not eating animal products. It's about not using any animal products. No leather, no, nothing that came from animals. And honey comes from an animal. So, specifically an insect. However, with the current state of the world and the fact that honey populations are under threat, I want to say honey to mean bees. Bee populations are under threat. And I'm not an expert here. Maybe I'm wrong in my perspective. I do think that given the current circumstances and how important bees are, it's like maybe the bee farms are kind of helping to keep the bees alive. Obviously, we need to solve the bigger problem of global warming and the pollution and all this stuff, the climate change, all that. That's the root cause. But in our current situation, like, I'm a very practical vegan. So, like, there are some hard lines, like, yeah, you don't eat meat, like, period. Like, that doesn't happen. But then with some of these other things, it's like, well, I mean, given the circumstances, like, with how important bees are we actually helping, in the meantime, to keep bee populations going, by farming them? Again, I'm not an expert. Maybe that has no impact and we're just exploiting them, in which case, no. But I personally still do not consume honey. But I can see an argument for how a vegan might consider consuming honey under the current circumstances to support that effort. Anyway, how about comfortable? Is the common pronunciation something like comfortable instead of comfortable? Yeah, this is a very, very, very common mistake for English learners, because you see 4 syllables, you see how it's spelled, and many English learners will say like comfortable or comfortable or something like that. That's not how it's pronounced. It's comfortable. Now, you can maybe keep that extra syllable in there if you're sort of playing with it. We'll do that sometimes. Like you say, are you comfortable? Comfortable? Comfortable. You can say it that way. But 99% of the time, no, it's comfortable. That's just the way we say the word. And I actually have a lesson that kind of talks about when I don't know if that was in that, but I talk about how like the R's shifting from like, I think the consonant to the R vowel or something like that. And sometimes, it'll actually like switch. So like that the F and the T are kind of, or not the F and the T, the T and the are sort of like switching around, and we're deleting the A in that third syllable, and we're reducing it to 3 syllables, right? Comforter instead of comfort. And that happens with a couple different words, but is the T omitted in phrases like let's go or what's up? No, good question. There is no T. I know what you're asking, though. Technically, there's no T because it's an illusion. You go into here, it's not let's, that would be a T. It's let's. You just push the T or push the S from the T position. But you're asking really, can you say like less, right? Where there's like, you don't even go into that. You just do a straight S, less, let's go, what's up? Yes, it does sound a little more informal. It sounds a little more unclear. But it does exist. Yes, it is possible. But I wouldn't say that it's standard. It's that's something that starts sounding a little more informal. Aula, welcome back. Are tast and mast also pronounced with the K dropped or the dropped K? I asked because there's a rhyme in Don Juan with the 3 of them. Yes. Okay. So again, fully enunciated, tasked, masked. Usually we're going to say tasked, mast, the masked man. No problem. Yeah, you can drop that K. Same as asked, right? You put a T in front of it, tasked. You put an M in front of it, mast. You put a B in front of it, bast. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing. And coming back to the singular plural issue, if you were to use foods as a native speaker, in what context would that be? Yeah, the whole foods question. It's very similar to, at least in my mind, it's very similar to when we use people and peoples, right? Because people is already the plural of person, but peoples with an S is a word. It has a very specific meaning. And to me, it kind of feels like the similar type of a similar type of distinction. So if we talk about people, it's just people, like a group of people, all people, whatever. Where if we talk about a peoples, that's like a particular nation, like nation, I was gonna say nationality, particular nation or culture, right? Like the peoples of Asia or whatever. That could be like a whole region, like, Asian culture in general. Where if we say like the people of Asia, we're not talking about like the cultures and stuff. We're talking about literally like the human people who live in Asia and are like citizens of those countries, rather than like their, all the stuff that goes with that. It's actually about the people themselves. Food and foods. So like they're obviously food doesn't have a culture. Food is part of culture, but you say like they're throughout the world, different peoples have different foods. I'm pretty sure that's a grammatically correct statement. It's kind of tied to that same type of idea, like the range of like so there's like food in general is just like food as a concept. It's something you eat, right? So it's not plural. But if we're talking about like, okay, so like the food of this culture and the food of this culture and the food of this culture collectively would be different types of foods. Now, probably in everyday English, we're probably just going to say different types of food. And we don't really use foods, just like in everyday speech, we don't usually tend to use peoples. They're not very common words, although they are technically accurate if you use them in the proper way. We tend to kind of just ignore those versions and just say food and people in everyday speech. So it kind of doesn't matter too much. If you want to, be technically accurate, or you're in a formal situation, especially an academic situation, you should know like peoples and foods are used in this case, and people and food are used in other cases. But in real life speech, it kind of doesn't really matter. I would just use the singular. Can we link the S to will? I heard both this will and this'll. Is the reduction informal? Sometimes I hear this'll be fine. This will be fine. Okay, this will be, yeah, okay. No, it makes perfect sense. Good question. Yes, will is a standard contraction. I'll, you'll, he'll, right, with the pronouns. But remember, We have many more spoken contractions than we have written contractions. And also remember, please, 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 please remember, I don't care what any other teacher told you, I don't care what any book tells you, contractions are not informal. Contractions are not informal. There are maybe some very highly reduced contractions like IMA, which means I am going to do something, that yes, are more informal. But just taking a word, whether that's a name or a pronoun or a word like this, and contracting will to ul, or is to s, or have done to u've done, right? It doesn't matter. These are standard spoken contractions. We don't write them all, but in speech, we will say them regardless of formality level. So yes, you'll hear this will, and that's because they chose not to contract it for whatever reason. Maybe they're emphasizing the will. This will be fine. Very commonly, we're just gonna say this'll be fine. That'll work. That'll work, right? What'll you do? What will you do? What'll you do? Super common, normal speech, not informal, normal speech. Okay. Yes, good question. Do you drop any T's in the word I was gonna say container, continental, continental. Yeah, you can actually drop all the T's technically. Continental. Although the first T I wouldn't say is dropped. Continental. Okay. There's a lot of things that we could do here. Interestingly, fully enunciated continental. Right? You pronounce those T's, and it could come out that way, or maybe you just pronounce one of the T's. That can happen too. It doesn't matter. If you don't enunciate the T's at all, you stop the first T. Right? Like mountain, continent. So it's that sort of like held T. And then the second T, we wouldn't say like continental. So I can't even do that. Continental. Like, no, we're going to use NT plus vowel inside the word, drop the T, continental, continental. So that T disappears. The reason the first T doesn't disappear, even though we have NT plus vowel, is because we have NT plus vowel plus N, which we know can trigger this sort of stopped T in the middle of something like mountain. Continental. If you're speaking a little bit faster, a little bit more lazily, then you can also go ahead and drop that T. I don't think that's the standard way. The standard way would be to stop the T, continent. But you can say continental, and just maybe make the N a little bit longer. So a continental breakfast at a hotel, continental. Perfectly fine. But that's like the least enunciated version of it. Possible. Definitely possible. You never use of before this, that, these, those. I did this mistake. Made this mistake. Uncontrollable times. I guess. An uncountable amount of times. Numerous times. It's going to be a little harder to change that bad habit, but I'm going to keep that in mind. Things. It's not that we never use it. It depends on the grammar, right? Like if I say I don't know. Let's say this is my phone. Let's say I don't know what this is. Okay. Now probably we're going to say like, what is this, or what's this called? But I could say, what's the name of this? Right? What's the name of this thing? That's perfectly fine. In the sentence that you had, we don't say remember of something. I don't think we ever use of after remember. It's because of the verb. It's not because of this or that. It's because of what was before it. You could talk about memories of something, because the noun of something, but remember and of, I don't think they ever go together. How is the word obviously pronounced? Good question. Fully enunciated, obviously. So we're going to go into that B. It's not really going to be pushed out too much. It can be kind of a weak B. That's fine, because we need that V to come in. Obviously. However, what we tend to kind of do more commonly is we'll say obviously. We'll just completely skip the B. Obviously. So that would be the most common way to say it. Uncountably, yes. Okay. Is there a case of assimilation in the word I mentioned previously? What was the word you mentioned previously? Oh, obviously. Technically, I guess that would be assimilation because the B and the V both use the lips. I wouldn't count it as assimilation because we're not moving anything. We're not shifting. We're not, I mean, technically, according to the definition of assimilation, I guess it would probably fall under that. But I wouldn't look at it that way. I would just look at it as a dropped B. Yeah. Can you pronounce with them? Wait, with them, with. Okay, so with them. See, quotations. Important. Can you pronounce with them with a normal unvoiced TH into a dental D? You skipped this question. I think it's not showing up for you. There's a chance I missed it, but yeah, I didn't see that question. With them. I'm going with them. With them. So with them. I guess there's a possibility maybe it could come out that way. Like if you're kind of like you hit that TH and then you continue to close into the dental. So it's like the first TH, which by the way, with can use a voiced or unvoiced TH. It really doesn't matter. But if you're, say you're like going from closing towards the teeth and you start that TH sound and then you don't stop there. You just like keep going. So like maybe like that first TH comes out as like more of a TH and then the second one is the dental. I guess that could happen, but me trying to do that, like I have to consciously try to focus on doing that. So I would say no, like there's no point in doing that. You just say with them. You just make them both dental. It doesn't matter. Or if you enunciate with them. You're sort of switching between the voice and the voiceless. So there's the way that you're describing it is kind of making it extra complicated. But maybe it can happen that way. Can students at school say Mr. or Mrs.? So Mr. is usually MR because I see you have MRS. So MR would be Mr. The way you have it is fully spelled out, which is fine. Or Mrs. as Title II called teachers without the last name or just with the name. Okay. It's normally it's going to be with the name. If you just say Mr., that sounds like you don't know their name. So if it's a stranger, you don't know their name, but it's a man. So, oh, excuse me, Mr. Right, because you don't know their name. But in a school, they tell you from the first day, I'm Mr. Jones, right? So you would always say Mr. Jones. That's like his name as, from your perspective as a student. That's one thing. Does the adjective self-assured have a negative meaning? To me, it kind of sounds that the person is confident in a condescending way. It definitely can. Self-assured. I don't think it has to be negative. I think we probably do usually use it in a negative way, especially if we had two, like he's too self-assured, or he's overly self-assured. But I think you can be self-assured without necessarily it being like an arrogant thing. It's just like you're very like confident in your own abilities. But it definitely usually it has a negative meaning. Yes. How do you feel about people pronouncing else like else? I do it myself. It doesn't matter. I'll use both. Can you link not an with the flap T? Not only can you, but that is the normal thing to do. Yes, not an. You could also stop it. You can say notin. See here, just like mountain, you can do exactly that same thing, right? It's not an apple. It's not an apple. Not mountain. It's not an apple. Because even though it's two words, we get the same type of thing. We have that T followed by what would be probably a schwa, because an usually reduces to or maybe or just an N. So we have that N after it. And so you can actually apply that same rule between these two words. It's not an apple. Or you can flap it. It's not an apple. Not an. Both work perfectly fine. There's two things that you can do. Whichever one comes out is what happens. It's 2 o'clock. We're out of time. Damn, that went fast. Okay. No more questions. I'm going to attempt really quick over the next, say, 5, maybe 10 minutes to answer the rest of the questions. No more questions, okay? Anything after Einstein's question here will be not answered because I'm going to have to go. Completely lost track of time. Okay, so Churchill has a book titled The History of English-Speaking Peoples. Okay, see, there you go. There you go. So multiple groups of, right, because England traditionally, I mean, obviously there's the Celtic people and invaders and this and that. There's a whole long history there, but you know, like there's people from this part of England, this part of England, this part of England, and you know, like England wasn't necessarily unified at one point, and so there's, you know, different peoples who are all English. They're all, you know, from England, and so it's like different groups of people, but they're shared under like a similar culture. So English-speaking peoples, right? So it's peoples is like a really technical term. This is a good example. Thank you for that. If you say the history of English-speaking people, that actually sounds, well, actually, hold on, English-speaking peoples. I guess that could also apply maybe not to people from England. That's my default thought, maybe because you said Churchill, English-speaking peoples. But like Australia, the United States, Britain, or the UK, whatever, there is definitely a very shared culture. I mean, obviously there's like American culture, Australian culture, there's differences, but English-speaking people tend to have pretty similar culture overall. And so I guess that could extend out. But if you said history of English-speaking people, history of English-speaking peoples, history of English-speaking people, that definitely sounds like it applies to like, well, that could also apply to non-natives, because if you speak English but you're not a native speaker, you are an English-speaking person, right? You speak English. So that could apply to people who aren't natives as well if you don't use the S. So I guess that would be the technical distinction there. But in everyday speech, we probably wouldn't care that much. We would use English-speaking people, depending on the context, to refer to either all people who speak English, native or not, or if the context is clear, we'd be talking about like, you know, the UK, Australia, the United States, native speakers. Okay, is the word capstone as meaning somebody's greatest achievement outdated? It's still used in an academic sense. It's like your big final project before you get your degree or whatever, but in everyday speech, I don't think we really use it. A, you're welcome. Davin, is the TH in scythe and sleuth supposed to be voiced or unvoiced? Unvoiced. Scythe, sleuth. Sleuth. I'm going to do some sleuthing. If you do a voiced TH, it sounds like a verb. For the noun, like a sleuth, a detective, TH doesn't sound right. Scythe, using a voiced one doesn't sound too bad, but I would use the voiceless one. But there is a silent E, which tells us that it should actually be voiced. So I guess it doesn't really matter in that case. But I would use a voiceless TH for that particular word. Why is the K dropped in words like mast? I already explained this. It ultimately comes down to the fact that English doesn't like 3 consonant sounds together. You can go back and watch my explanation of that. We tend to drop the middle consonant if we have three consonant sounds together. Also could have something to do with the fact that we have 2 stop sounds together, and we don't like pronouncing both of them if we don't have to. Makes it harder to speak. I notice that when I'm lazy, I tend to lower the first half of the A diphthong towards more of an et sound, especially in the word okay. Is that okay? I tend to lower the first half of the A diphthong more towards eh. No, because that would be okay. It can get kind of close, maybe, yeah, but it definitely don't make it into an eh. You can get lazy with it, but be careful. Can and I be pronounced as an I? Yes, it will very commonly be pronounced that way. We almost always drop the D in and. You can pronounce it, it can come out, but we almost always drop it. This will sound like thistle. No, thistle is a voiceless TH. Otherwise, they do sound, wait, no, yeah, thistle. So they sound exactly the same, except this uses a voiced TH. Thistle uses a voiceless TH. Would you ever shorten obviously to obvi? No. I've never even heard anybody shorten it to obvi. Is acai pronounced acai? I actually don't know. You see this written a lot because obviously it's a common superfood or whatever. I always pronounce it like acai because I think that's closer to how it probably is supposed to be pronounced. But since you put acai, I'm pretty sure I hear people say it that way. So probably acai would probably be the English way to say it. Recently, a storm passed through my city, and maybe it's weak for what's considered dangerous in the U.S., but my house can't stand this high velocity of wind. Orange alert, 70 kilometers. We had to fix the roof tile while the storm was happening. Kind of terrifying. We're okay now. It shouldn't be normal in Brazil, but that's what's happening. It's becoming more normal over time. Climate change is real. Okay, yeah, because I mentioned climate change. Exactly. Yeah, sorry that you had to go through that. I'm glad you're safe. That sounds definitely terrifying. Wow. Sorry to hear that. Is it okay to say instead of them? Yes, is a or m even is a standard reduction of them. Especially if you're like trying to flap a T into it to make a flap D. Get them. Yeah. Oh my God, it's no more question time. Exactly. I'm gonna go stream "Funny How Time Flies When You're Having Fun" by Janet Jackson from her best-selling Out of Control Now. Was this an advertisement? Okay. Good. Enjoy that. You're welcome. See, I thought so. Yeah. Mwahaha. Good to know. Thank you. Okay, good. So thank you guys very much. Slightly over time, but we got to wrap it up. Next week we'll be back. Hopefully I don't have any technical difficulties next time. But yes, new video coming soon. I'm working on a big one. Not necessarily going to be the next one that's published, but it is going to be a big one. I'm going to try to get some things out for you guys over the next few days. So thank you and have a good weekend.